This is the largest expansion of women's business centers in the history of the Small Business Administration. And as you mentioned, we have nearly 140 women's business centers in cities and counties and states across the country, including, in honor of Hispanic Heritage Month, 2 new centers that we recently opened on the island of Puerto Rico, making this one of the largest investments in women entrepreneurship ecosystems in the Caribbean US territory and on the island of Puerto Rico. And so we're excited about continuing to support our centers and to empower them to go forward through COVID, understanding that they too are also or were also impacted by COVID, and providing interesting new ways to support the programmatic innovations that they are creating. Just last month or 2 months ago, we actually released our Resiliency and Recovery grants, which was $2.7 million to support programmatic innovations of our women's business centers. And across this national network of nearly 140 centers, they're reaching, counseling, and training nearly 60,000 women who are looking to start businesses every year, and are responsible for creating and or counseling new business starts in the 5,000 new businesses a year range. So our centers are important, and this office is important both from a funding perspective, but also from an advocacy perspective. But when you ask Jerry more broadly, like what is SBA doing around encouraging and supporting women entrepreneurs? I'll start first with the Office of the President. On his first day in office, the president signed an executive order. You mentioned women of color, and it was really focused on ensuring that all federal agencies were looking at the ways in which they were engaging with underrepresented communities, which both includes women as well as communities of color or underrepresented or marginalized, historically marginalized communities. That we were ensuring that we as members of the administration and leaders in these agencies and offices were reaching as many communities across the country as we can. Not as we were, but as we can. And so that's why we have been at OBO rapid speed, advancing the footprint of our centers and funding and supporting them with the grant funds that we have. The president also stood up a Gender Policy Council, which he reinstituted. Previously, during the Obama administration, we had the White House Council on Women and Girls, and the Biden-Harris administration has restood this council up and called it the Gender Policy Council to, even in naming, ensure that there was inclusion on how people identify and see themselves from a gender perspective. SBA had made many changes when the new administration came on board to ensure that women had an opportunity to compete for everything from the PPP loan programs to our restaurant revitalization programming, making it so that, one, there was prioritization given to smaller businesses, which in the first iterations of PPP we saw did not have equitable opportunity to compete for funding. And as you mentioned, Jerry, in your comments, majority of women-owned businesses are single employee, being the sole proprietor type of company. And so making PPP funding available for them, marketing this to them, ensuring that they were aware was critical. But with the restaurants, that was nearly $16.8 billion in funds to support restaurateurs across the country. And for the first nearly 3 weeks of that program being open, we wanted to make sure that underrepresented women, veteran, and rural community business owners had an opportunity to really get in and submit their applications. And what that did not mean is that others on the other side of that period of prioritization did not get funded, because they actually did. But what it did mean was that women had an opportunity to really compete for funds that were dire for them for the business continuation support that they needed.
Great, thank you. And so it really seems like the SBA listened and really observed and heard the voices of women at the table saying, we hear that, we see that most of you are self-employed. We're seeing that initially the PPP may not have been as clear as to how it could be equitably distributed to women, most especially women of color. in underserved areas, rural areas, micropolitan or metropolitan areas, we are making every effort to remedy that as well. Before I go on to my next question, can you talk a little bit about how important it is for the women who did get the PPP to apply for forgiveness soon as well? Because that is coming up on the horizon and
Oh,
why
yeah.
it's important. Yes.
At SBA, we actually just reached another milestone, which was processing nearly or more than 1 million applications for PPP forgiveness. So absolutely, if you were fortunate enough to receive PPP funding and use the funds within the eligible areas of spend, then we highly encourage you to submit your eligibility for loan forgiveness. Part of the structuring of this program was to ensure that capital was provided to small business owners, and if it was used in the manners in which were outlined by the program, then they should be forgivable. But that can only happen when you submit your information. SBA, through the leadership of our 27th Administrator, Isabella Guzman, designed an online portal even to make it more efficient and effective for some of our smaller lenders, CDFIs, who didn't have a back office to go through the processing of all these PPP forgiveness applications, to be able to use a centralized portal. And that portal has actually been responsible for processing more than 1 million applications at this point in time. So we highly encourage you to get your applications in. One other thing I do want to say, Jerry, before we move on, is the COVID EIDL program is still in existence and still has remaining funds. And so we are still in COVID, right? So we are coming into a moment of recovery, but there still remains billions of dollars for American small businesses to be able to access COVID EIDL funding relief and COVID targeted advances. And so I want to ensure that anyone who is still suffering or struggling through the COVID pandemic and its impact on your small business, through, again, the leadership of the administrator, even the COVID EIDL loan amounts increased from $500,000 to $2 million, which is another historical amount that we want to make sure folks are aware of and to applying for if they're eligible.
Great, thank you so much. And actually, we'd ask all of our partners, if you happen to be on this call and a business service provider, economic service organization, to please amplify that COVID EIDL funding is still available, especially for the women business owners. There's not a lot of message amplification that can get out to them if they're in disadvantaged areas. Those funds are available until the end of December, but the sooner that you can get the application is. And one thing I have to say and give credit for SBA, they've actually made it more flexible for women, well, everybody to apply, especially women, because women tend to have a little bit more credit burden being the heads of households. They've made it more flexible. They've actually lowered the credit requirements for the COVID EIDL funding down to 570. So please, thank you, Natalie, for uplifting that. Please apply for the COVID EIDL funding. It is available. And if you are a business or entrepreneurship service organization, please help the SBA continue to uplift that and amplify that message that that funding is still available. I can tell you, we are on the ground seeing it all the time. People are still looking for funds. We are still in a recovery phase. And unfortunately, we are held to the uncertainty of the virus at this point. And so manage that cash flow, forecast that, and you actually may need those COVID EIDL fundings because we are in this stage of uncertainty. You need to manage that cash and see if you're eligible for it. So actually, props and thank you to the SBA for actually adapting the COVID EIDL funds for the needs of people who have the characteristics to apply for it. I wanted to ask you a question, Natalie, on the WBCs. So if somebody were to ask, what's a WZ? What's a women's business center? What do they do in particular? How can they help women? And what's some of their features that people are unaware of? In regards to their assistance, are they costly to get some advisement there? And in addition to that, I'd love for you to speak on the Ascent program for women as well. So let's, if you can speak to
Sure.
what exactly are women's business centers? I don't think that they get the visibility and profile that they need. And so this is a really wonderful opportunity during October to amplify and increase that visibility for people to access them.
Absolutely. And our office works 365 to ensure that the Women's Business Center program and our centers, therefore, are amplified at the highest level possible. We have been very fortunate to have an administrator who gets it and understands why women's business centers are needed and the important gap that they fill. And has incorporated our centers at another historical level in much of her official travel to various cities across the country, which I've been fortunate to be able to join her on as well. So our women's business centers. So these are physical centers that you can go to across the country and cities across the nation. If you're looking for a center, you can either go to the Association for Women's Business Center.org, awbc.org, or SBA.gov and check out our site there for the Office of Women's Business Ownership to get an official map of where all the centers are. But you should be able to go in to receive free counseling, free training, access to programs and events and community initiatives, and to be able to have access to training classes and resources and supports that you need. There are some programs that may be multi-week or accelerator for which there may be a nominal fee. But in general, the Women's Business Center Network provides these services free of charge to those who walk through their center doors. And again, if you're looking at everything from trying to go after government contracts with the president's recent historical announcement of increasing small disadvantaged business utilization to 15% of all federal contracting opportunities, or you're thinking about going after a loan, or you're thinking about how do I put my business plan together, those are all things that you should be able to and are able to go to our women's business centers to get questions answered on. And again, we have 138, I believe, at this point, and it will be 39 by the end of this month. Centers across the country that are working to empower and to make opportunity for women to walk through their doors something that is possible.
Thanks, Natalie. And let me ask you, what are the top one or two challenges that you and your experience in leadership have seen confronting women business owners that these women's business centers can support and help with them?
Well, first and foremost, I think by nature and existence of them being named women's business centers, there's always a fundamental challenge, right? Why do we need women's business centers when we may have other centers? Well, we need them because women still need supports. If there's nothing that we've seen from the COVID pandemic, we've seen that it has disproportionately impacted women, women walking out of the workforce, women and their access to capital, women and their access to entrepreneurial supports and small business supports. Goldman Sachs recently released a report at the top of this week in honor of National Women's Small Business Month, talking about how COVID has impacted women entrepreneurs. And so our women's business centers are in themselves being ambassadors of the agenda for women entrepreneurs through their very existence. I think the other ways that they do this is by through their existence, also evangelizing why women need supports to corporate partners, government partners, and others in their local communities. As you probably know, Jerry, working with Small Business Majority, this is about the culmination and the bubble up, right? This is about ensuring that in communities from Tulsa to Honolulu to New York City, that people understand women still have challenges, but women are still succeeding. And we're always excited about seeing the rapid growth that women experience during moments like this, where they've taken charge and command of their own destiny by establishing businesses. In some instances, women made choices during COVID to say, hey, this job, I'm not interested in anymore. I think I want to start my own business. And right now, the Chinese character for chaos is the same one for opportunity. It has been and remains one of the most opportune times to start a new business. You can literally reach anywhere in the world from your kitchen table through the power of the internet. and to do webinars and sessions and have meetings with people that otherwise may have been more expensive for you to connect with due to travel costs and other things. So this is the moment to take advantage of the historical investment in businesses and the reclamation of your time, so to say, and to how you want to move forward with life after COVID based off what you learned because of life dealing with COVID.
Thank you for that. And as you were speaking about the Women's Business Center, there is a lot of praise that SBA should be proud of in the chat from different states, saying that Florida has been wonderful, Alabama has been wonderful business centers. I think one was Pennsylvania as well. So kudos to SBA and its resources with the Women's Business Centers. And as Natalie pointed out, there is no geographic restrictions for this, especially with the internet as well. They do offer that free counseling and support. There was a question in the chat, what about for women-owned contracts? They do also provide that preparation of how you can navigate how to obtain women-owned certification, MBE certification if you need, not just the women's certification. So they can provide that assistance for you. And I think not very many people, when you go outside of small business, are aware of these free resources to support women, economic development, and the growth of small businesses.
And
Natalie, want to ask, oh, go on.
And Jerry, to that point, you asked me about our Ascent platform, and while you're talking about digital platforms, it made me think of it. So Ascent is a digital platform where, to the point you just made, a woman anywhere at any time can go online and learn more about starting business, running a business, building a team, innovation, technology, finance, contracting, the entire gambit. We have a number of journeys that are created on the Ascent platform that include podcasts, that include workbooks, training materials that are downloadable all from your laptop or your home computer. So we encourage folks to visit the ascent.sba.gov site. And this is a platform designed for women entrepreneurs. Ascent is for the woman entrepreneur. It features women entrepreneurs, and it is written for women entrepreneurs, understanding, again, the unique challenges and opportunities that we experience.
Thank you for that. Can you give a little bit of an insight? What are the other SBA resources that you just want to briefly touch upon that could help also women entrepreneurs, complementing the women's business centers as well?
Yeah, so I would be remiss by not mentioning a number of our other resource partners, which include SCORE, which provides a mentorship to small business small business owners through executives that are formerly or retired. We also have our SBDC program, Small Business Development Centers across the country, which complement, in some instances, women graduate from the Women's Business Center initiatives and go to their SBDCs for additional support and assistance. We have small business export centers, which comes out of our export office, which Michelle leads. And for those who are thinking, I know the administrator is very adamant about ensuring that women are looking at global opportunities to expand their business, that they look at the STEP centers that we have. And then, our financing products, right? So access to capital becomes the big conversation. Those are all the access to trainings and counselings centers that we have. But then there's the 7A, the 504, the micro loan programs that are existent. These are the foundational access to capital programs that SBA has, in addition to what I think we've become far more known for at this point, which is our disaster recovery initiatives, some of which are new and some of which have been in existence like EIDL prior to the COVID pandemic. So I would say to anyone, when it comes to access to counseling, we have our resource partners. When it comes to access to capital, we have funding opportunities. When it comes to access to contracts, the SBA is the first place that you would go to receive certification. We offer certification in everything from women-owned small business, 8A, Hub Zone, veteran, and many others. And so this gives you the license to hunt for these government contracts. And all of that, again, is falling under the umbrella of the Small Business Administration, which represents the 30 million small businesses across the country.
Thank you so much, Natalie. And just one last question as we come upon the close of our hour. What is a piece of advice that you would provide women entrepreneurs for pandemic recovery?
You know, I a few things.
So not just one.
One piece of advice. One, I would say, at any point in time, you should always be nimble enough to pivot and innovate. And I think COVID expedited that for many of us. I think it caused us to look at the ways in which we were operating. And some of us were more rapid in speed to the innovation table or to the pivot table. But it's critical for you to always think of new ways to do business, because at some point in time, the current way will become the old way. And the only way to stay relevant and to stay ahead is to make sure that you are looking for new ways to improve and enhance the way in which you do business. The next thing is to stay in the game. I think COVID also gave us a longer term amount of time for us to really question whether or not this is something that we want for ourselves. But the truth of the matter is, again, when you're just starting a business, for many people, it takes a year, 2, 3 years to actually get to their first big break. Well, we went through some of that time during COVID, right? And so to be able to stay in the game for 1 year, 2 years, 3 years while you're trying to make your business work is the same as having survived the COVID pandemic. And you can never lose the game if you don't stop playing it. And so I would just encourage folks again to remain committed to their work and to pivot and innovate when the market shows you that it will, with or without you. And also when you want to start to find new ways to expand and grow the ways in which you do business and new market opportunities for yourself.
Thank you so much. So pivot and stay in the game. As Natalie said, you can never lose the game if you don't stop playing it. Thank you so much for joining us today on this webinar to really kick off and celebrate National Women's Small Business Month. We hope that you found some of these resources helpful to you. We did put it in the chat. This webinar is being recorded. To find an SBDC in your area, go to americassbdc.org. The Ascent website, I typed in the chat as well. And I also typed in where you can find a women's business center. You can go to the Association for Women's Business Centers, or you can go to sba.gov. That website is also in the chat. For any questions, we will make this available online so you could review it again and send out to you these resources in an email. Natalie, thank you so much for joining us today for this webinar. And we hope that you stay well and stay safe.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Thank you all. And thank all of you for participating. Good afternoon, all.